What's up, guys, and welcome back to Bass Fishing Tips. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about winter chatterbait fishing. Now, I love to throw a chatterbait in the winter because I catch a lot of big bass with it, and also I think a lot of people put the chatterbait down and fish become just a little less accustomed to it throughout the winter. You know, a lot of people, when they think about chatterbait fishing, they think about 55 degrees plus. You know, we're going to fish it in the spring, in the summer, in the fall, and then you put your chatterbaits in the box and you don't think about them until the spring rolls back around again. But for me, I keep on fishing the chatterbait in the winter, and I've had some phenomenal days out on the water throwing this bad boy around. But there's a few key adjustments that I make to the chatterbait that helps me to go out there and to catch some fish on this thing this time of year. And so that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. How I adjust my chatterbait to help me go out there and to catch wintertime bass, cold water bass, and just to have a great day out on the water. And so without any further ado, let's get right into today's video, and let's start with the colors that I choose to throw. So obviously one of my favorite colors is that bright orange, fire crawl, methylated, whatever you guys want to call it. That color right there is an absolute cold water killer. And it's a cold water killer not only here, but all throughout the country. It doesn't matter where I've taken it and what water clarity that I've taken it. When I'm fishing in cold water, when I say cold water, I'm talking anything from 50 degrees and below, this color right here has just always murdered for me. And so it's one that I have a ton of confidence in. Now, you know, for a long time, I didn't really understand why it worked as well as it did. You know, to kind of put this in context for you guys, I've been fishing the bright orange colorways in the wintertime for a long, long time. You know, back even when I was a kid, like a little bitty kid, 4 or 5 years old, my dad was getting jerk baits and crankbaits and spinner baits and jigs all custom made in these really bright orange colorways because they just worked. I don't really know how he discovered it. Unfortunately, I don't think I ever talked to him about it. But it is just one of those things that it's always worked. And so, you know, as the fad of the blaze orange or the fire crawl chatterbait kind of came into existence, I was more happy than anything because I thought, well, finally somebody's making an orange chatterbait. There's no reason that it wouldn't work in winter fishing. And I was right, because it has always worked in so many other different bait categories. But I love fishing the orange color this time of year for that reason, but also a little bit of a theory that I've come up with about why the orange works as well as it does. I've talked to a lot of biologists, and one of the facts about a bass is that it is a cold-blooded creature. And the fact that it is a cold-blooded creature means that the water temperature that it lives in affects it a lot more than people think it does. You know, you'll hear other anglers talk about how water temperature doesn't mean anything. And there's a context to that as well. Meaning that, you know, it is true that if water temperature is 2 degrees from one area of the lake to the other, you're not going to find a dramatic difference in the way that a bass is acting. But the water temperature and the overall water temperature is going to affect just their overall existence within that water. Higher water temperatures, higher metabolism, more optimized, you know, just better suited for living because they're warmer, their blood's warmer, their body's warmer, they're more optimized. Colder water temperatures, the slower they're going to move, the more you're going to have to get them to react to things, and the more they may be unwilling to do something like bite a lure, chase a lure, or something like that. In that same kind of vein of thought, one of the things that a lot of biologists have kind of theorized and talked about, and I think it's been tested here and there, is that the colder the water gets, the less you know, optimize a fish's eye is to actually work. And so meaning the colder the water gets, the worse a fish's eyes work. Now, they don't know exactly what that looks like to a fish. It doesn't mean do things get blurry, do things get duller? They're not really sure. But it does mean that when colder water rolls around, the brighter something is and the more that it contrasts the environment around it, the easier it is for a bass to see. And if a bass can see something, it can kill something. And so I love the really bright colors this time of year for that fact. The bass can see it really, really well. They can hone in on it really, really well. And then thus you can get them to react to it, because a lot of the times in cold water, we're trying to get bass to react to things. At least I am. I like reaction bites. I like power fishing. And so if I can get a bass to react and I can hit that switch, that involuntary switch to chase something and kill it, that's what I want to do. And I feel as though with the really bright orange colors, they do a good job of contrasting, and thus I can get those bass to react to it. And so I pick up the oranges this time of year. Now, am I exclusively throwing the orange? No. But is it the color that I pick up first? Absolutely, because it is one that I've got a ton of confidence in that the bass can see and that I'm going to be able to get them to react to it. Now, the next thing is going to be the trailer that I am using. This time of year, I like to go just a little bit more compact with my bladed jig. Now, that's not to say that they won't eat one with a full-size trailer on the back. I'm sure they will, but I've just seen something just a little bit more compact tends to get a few more bites. And so the trailer that I'm actually using is the Berkley Pit Boss. Now, the reason I picked the Pit Boss is because there's so few trailers out there that come with the really bright orange methylate color. And so I found the Pit Boss in this color. This is called Hot Crawl. And as you guys can see, you've got that really bright methylate color that does a good job of not only being that color, but also matching up with your bladed jig really, really well. But what I do is, as you guys can see with a Pit Boss straight out of the package, this bad boy's got 4 little legs on the back. And so the first thing I do is I pull those 2 outside legs off of that and just leave the 2 center legs. What I've found is when you've got all 4 legs on there, the bladed jig will still work, obviously. It's just you don't get as much action out of the back of that trailer. Whereas if you pull off those 2 legs, leave those 2 center legs, you'll get a heck of a lot more action on it. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll flip these bad boys until they get too tore up to actually use, and then I'll just cut off the top and then pull off the 2 legs so that I'm not ruining brand new trailers, you know, by sticking them on the back of there and pulling the legs off of them. Then the next thing that I do is actually how I rig it up on the bladed jig itself. So as you guys can see there, those tails are in line with that hook point. So I'm going to be rigging that thing up horizontal, meaning instead of rigging it flat like we would on a Texas rig, I'm just going to turn it on its side and I'm going to rig it up on there, because I love anything that is like has a vertical presentation on a bladed jig. You know, when that blade actually activates and you kind of get that turbulence in behind that bait, what I have found is that anything that is straight up and down and in line with the hook and in line with the body of the chatterbait is just going to have a heck of a lot more action. And so that's one of the ways that I like to rig this thing up. And it also gives it just a little bit kind of, it's like a short kind of chubbier profile, really kind of fills that thing out. And like I said, just one of the best ways to rig this little bad boy up, to get that color on there, to get that little bit more compact, kind of shorter, fatter look that I'm looking for, and to be able to get those fish to bite. Now, the next thing that I do is really focus in on blade color. Now, when you talk about like the blaze or the fire crawl color, I've pretty sure that the actual jackhammer has a black blade as well. I used to have some of those jackhammers, but unfortunately I don't have them anymore. But I really love painted blades this time of year. Now, the painted blade is really interesting. The reason that I started really throwing a painted blade, and oftentimes this time of year, even if I'm not throwing that blaze color, that fire crawl color, whatever you guys want to call it, I will actually take a Sharpie and paint the blade, and or take sandpaper and sandpaper the shine off of that blade, is because I had a year where I was fishing a bladed jig in some really clear water. It's like 45 degrees, and these fish would come up and they would hit the blade and they would totally miss the body of the bait. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact, again, kind of going back to that idea of the fish's eyes weren't working that well. And so they were just hitting the thing that they could see the best, which happened to be the flash on the blade of that jig. And so when I took a Sharpie and painted that blade up, I went from getting fish hitting the head and totally missing the body and missing the hook to just choking the actual body of the bait, getting a good hook in those fish and getting them to eat it and getting them into the boat. And so I love a painted blade this time of year for that. It's anecdotal, but it happened. It happened several times, and ever since I started throwing the painted blades or a duller blade in colder water, I get more bites, or not even get more bites. I tend to, every bite that I get a good hook into them and I get them into the boat. And so it's something to keep into consideration. Like if you notice that with a bladed jig that you're fishing, like you keep getting bites, but they keep missing it, keep getting bites, keep missing it, take a Sharpie, paint that blade up, take that shine off that blade, and you may just adjust it enough to get some of those fish to keep from hitting the head and actually start hitting the body of the bait and getting them into the boat. And then the last thing is actually how I fish it. Now, I still fish a lot of your standard retrieves this time of year, just that cast and wind back, maybe you know, like a reel and pause or something like that. But one of my favorites, absolute favorites to do this time of year is to throw the bladed jig into there and to pulse it a couple times like I'm fishing a jig and then start reeling it back to the boat. I can't tell you how many big bass I have caught doing this, and especially like treating it like a flipping jig, flipping it into a piece of cover, into a piece of wood, up under a boat dock, something like that. You know, just give it a couple quick hops, activate that blade, let it fall back down to the bottom, and then as soon as I start to reel it, those fish react to that thing. I think oftentimes this time of year, again, bass are affected by the water temperature that they live in, being cold-blooded creatures. And so, you know, the initial fall in there, or maybe the first couple pulls, will get that fish's attention. It kind of gets them looking in that direction, maybe gets them closer to that bladed jig, whether they see it, they feel it on their lateral line, whatever it may be. But when that thing actually activates and it starts to move is when they actually react to it and you get them to bite. But I love to throw that bladed jig in there, give it a couple, you know, just quick hops like I'm fishing a jig, and then start reeling it back out. Kind of give those fish a chance to see where it's at, get orientated to it, and then once they kind of figure out where it's at and that thing starts moving, they can absolutely smoke it. Another one of my favorite retrieves is a yo-yo. Essentially treating a bladed jig, fishing a bladed jig, and just, you know, acting like a bladed jig is a lipless crankbait. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've been catching them on a lipless, pick up the bladed jig, start fishing it exactly how I would fish a lipless, which is either yo-yoing or dragging it this time of year. You throw this thing in there and you pick up a few more bites that you may not have otherwise picked up, and or vice versa. You know, start with the bladed jig and then flip off to the lipless crankbait. But yo-yoing this thing is so awesome. And I think so many people often forget just how versatile of a bait this thing actually is. And in some scenarios, yo-yoing this is going to be a lot more advantageous than yo-yoing something like a lipless, because this thing doesn't have treble hooks off the back. It's not going to get as marred up in grass and pond scum. It's not going to get as marred up in like rocks and timber, really anywhere, as much as the treble hooks on that lipless crankbait can. But you get that same kind of general sound profile that you get from the lipless crankbait. You know, as soon as that blade activates and it starts to move, it's going to hit that fish's lateral line. It's going to get that fish's attention. And anything I've seen this time of year, if it vibrates, if it rattles, if it just puts a lot of thump out into the water, oftentimes that hitting that lateral line of those bass is going to be the first step in getting them to actually kind of activate, to start to look. And that's one thing that the book Knowing Bass talks about. It's really, really fascinating, is that bass will sometimes kind of go into a state of suspended animation. And what I mean by that is, like, they just exist. They're waiting for some sort of stimulus around them to like reactivate their brain and turn them on, and for them to actually like orient themselves to whatever it may be and then go and actively seek it out and try to kill it. You know, an example that I've used before is kind of like the zombies on World War Z, where they just kind of stand there until they smell a human and then they start like looking them out. Now, it's not the same exact thing. You know, it's not like they're going to be ravenous monsters that chase things down, but oftentimes in the winter, a bass is going to do everything it can to conserve its energy, conserve itself, and kind of, you know, just be and exist in that cold water. And when something, you know, vibrates, rattles, moves, flashes, catches their eye, it turns their brain on, and then they've kind of gone into that more active seeking out mode, and you can get them to bite. And I think when you kind of take all of those things into consideration, it's one of the reasons that when you use the brighter orange colors, when you're using the vibration of the blade, when you're using those yo-yos, or even that kind of flip in there and treat it like a jig retrieve, just the whole package of how I like to fish a chatterbait in the winter, it's one of the reasons that I've had so much success with a chatterbait in the winter. And hopefully these are tips that you guys can go out, you can use to catch some more fish. And if you guys enjoyed this video, click this video that's popping up right here.